I got my first hit on varsity here my junior year, but in my senior years, I ended up hitting a ball into the gap. I was actually able to motor all the way around, and I got an inside the park home run. My first base coach, for some reason, felt I didn't touch first base, and I swear to you to this day I did. So, of course, the East Side ball players noticed that my first base coach was calling me to come back. Of course, I, being the astute ball player that I was and still am, I hit that bag and I just kept going. And well, the next pitch happened, and the pitcher was there, and he stepped off and he appealed to first base, and the umpire called me out. And I was livid. I was very angry. I kicked the bag onto the field. I was arguing, and it was actually one of my last games of my high school career. And it was one of those moments that will always kind of live in my memory. But the truth be told, I hit an inside the park home run that day. Counted as an out in the scorebook, but in my heart, I hit a home run here. So.
Don't you laugh at me, baby. Please don't you laugh at me. Don't you laugh at me, baby. Please don't you laugh at me. I want to tell you, baby. Please don't you laugh at me.
If Brian Lapinto sounds upset about his home run that wasn't, it's for good reason. Had it counted, his name would join the ranks of legendary players to homer at Hinchliffe, a list that includes Josh Gibson, Larry Doby, and Monty Irvin. Although located in Paterson, New Jersey, about 10 miles outside the five boroughs, Hinchliffe Stadium is closely linked with New York City's storied baseball heritage. In 1933, it became the home of the New York Black Yankees, the Negro League's answer to the all-white American League club in the Bronx. Today, it's a mess. But it wasn't always this way.
The first event here wasn't even a sporting event. It was actually a bicentennial to honor George Washington. It was a theatrical performance. Later that year, it was right in the middle of baseball season, and Paterson did have two professional sports teams, the Paterson Pros and the Paterson Truckers. And during the course of that season, we saw a number of Negro League teams play here as members of the visiting team. The New York Black Yankees actually played games here against local Paterson professional teams, and what local sports promoters noticed was attendance was much higher for games against the New York Black Yankees. So the businessmen of the time said, why don't we have a colored championship of the nation, which is basically an equivalent of a Negro League World Series, which featured the New York Black Yankees. From the colored championship of the nation, that really created a lot of interest for the Black Yankees, for the Paterson fans. And 1934 was the first season in which we saw active participation of the New York Black Yankees as a home team.
2 years later, the New York Cubans moved to Hinchliffe. Both the Cubans and the Black Yankees, along with the clubs they played, like the Newark Eagles and the Pittsburgh Crawfords, brought a host of talent to Paterson.
There are two Baseball Hall of Famers that actually tried out here at Hinchliffe. In 1937, Monty Irvin tried out here for the Newark Eagles. And then later in 1942, Paterson's own Larry Doby tried out for the same team. Both players ended up playing for the same team. They played in the 1946 Negro League World Series. And then later, in 1954, they played against each other in the World Series in the Major League Baseball with the Cleveland Indians and the New York Giants.
Baseball wasn't the only sport to sell out the 10,000 capacity stadium.
Hinchliffe Stadium is known as a horseshoe-style stadium, similar to the way the Polo Grounds was. And typically, the horseshoe-style stadium is pretty much more for football than it is for baseball. In fact, in 1932, Paterson had three professional football teams: the Paterson Nighthawks, the Paterson Giants, and the Silk City Bears. The Paterson Giants actually hosted the first NFL team to play at Hinchliffe Stadium. That was the Portsmouth Spartans. And Patersonians were wild about having an NFL team play in their city, that they actually had a parade from the team's hotel, which actually was at the YMCA, and they had a parade from the YMCA right to the stadium to honor the Spartans.
Perhaps the biggest draw of all, however, were the fights. Even though most of the boxers were amateurs, the events attracted top-shelf celebrities.
Joe Louis was actually here as a guest referee. Abbott and Costello would perform beforehand. And Babe Ruth would come out to watch boxing. In fact, I came across a newspaper article that would discuss that Babe Ruth was going to be here as opposed to the actual boxing and previewing the event.
Hinchliffe's decline can be traced to a 15-word press release issued April 10, 1947. It read, "The Brooklyn Dodgers today purchased the contract of Jackie Roosevelt Robinson from the Montreal Royals." The Negro Leagues were obsolete. Still, Hinchliffe remained an active venue for high school sports.
The city of Paterson owned Hinchliffe Stadium right up until the early 60s, but the Paterson Public Schools were the only entity really using Hinchliffe Stadium, so the city sold the stadium to the Paterson Public Schools for $1. In a very sad move, they decided to reconfigure the baseball diamond, taking away where the original Black Yankees and all the Negro League stars played at. Fast forward to the early 80s, and they decided to make yet another error, and they actually decided to put AstroTurf here at the stadium. And while AstroTurf was originally seen as being a godsend, we would learn years later that it was actually pretty much concrete with a little bit of carpet. And that, of course, caused some problems, and that eventually caused a sinkhole at the other side of the stadium in the west end zone.
Eventually, Paterson Public Schools, strapped for cash and unable to properly maintain Hinchliffe, condemned the stadium. The gates shut permanently in 1997.
I found out that Hinchliffe Stadium was going to be closed down by reading a newspaper article about how difficult it was for the Paterson Public Schools to maintain the building, how they were leaning toward demolition, how at a cost of $4 million they would demolish the building as opposed to restoring it at a cost of $4.8 million. That really angered me. That really made me really sad and made me wonder, well, why? It's such a beautiful place. It has rich history. And of course, the student athletes here in Paterson need it. I mean, the student athlete in Paterson is dying now because they don't have enough facilities.
After he discovered Hinchlife's impending closure, Lopinto wrote the Baseball Hall of Fame about the stadium.
I asked about Hinchliffe, what they knew. And they wrote back and they said that Hinchliffe Stadium is certainly represented in their archives. And that statement alone just charged me up and wanted me to learn more. Our organization, the Friends of Hinchliffe Stadium, started in 2002. And our first order of business was to get Hinchliffe Stadium placed on the National Register of Historic Places. One of the things that we've been lucky enough to acquire was a grant from the New Jersey Historic Trust. Part of the stipulation of that grant is for our organization to raise about $10,000, and we're in the process of trying to do that. And every penny will go towards a conditions assessment report and preservation plan. And what that will do is that will answer a lot of very important questions about the stadium. What can be restored, what can be rehabbed, what might need to be rebuilt.
Lopinto recognizes that restoring Hinchliffe will be tough. His vision for a revitalized stadium is ambitious, to say the least.
It's first and foremost should be used for high school athletics. We need to really nurture the youth of this town and give them a place where they can play and hone their skill. Once we identify the evenings where and the days that the schools are not using the facility, that's where your concerts, your auto racing comes into play, the circus, things of that nature, art festivals. The stadium can be used for a million and one things. It's just a matter of getting it back up and running. Even in the winter, you know, we can have outdoor ice skating. Why not? That could certainly be a possibility. You know, in the inner city, people don't really play hockey. Perhaps you can have some outdoor hockey lessons. Bring different things into the town that could really captivate the imagination of a young person.
Just like Lopinto was captivated in his high school days.
I played on the same field as Josh Gibson, as Larry Doby, you know, as Cool Papa Bell, these greats that are in baseball's Hall of Fame. And for me to be a part of that same history, it's an honor.